Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Kaitlin and Bill from Knowhere Public House. Do you guys want to tell us a little bit about yourselves and the restaurant?
Oh, okay, I
Go ahead,
first.
Bill.
All right, well, I'm a retired professor from Laurentian University. I taught geography and urban development and environmental studies for close to 30 years. And I've always had it in the back of my mind that I'd kind of like to have a bar at some point in time. Happened to meet Kaitlin, and she had a similar dream, a little bigger than mine, a restaurant bar, and she happened to find this place in terms of the context that it was David, who was in here before us, wanted to get out of his lease. It was too big for him. And she said, "Billy, are you really interested?" I said, "Yes, I am." And we managed to put it together, and as I like to say, the blonde has the brains and the old man has the brawn, and here we are.
And so when you guys first decided, like you mentioned both having the idea of wanting to have a restaurant or a bar, and so beforehand you guys never knew each other at all?
We knew each other about a year before we opened this.
Yeah, I think it was about a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was bartending at the Laughing Buddha downtown, and that's
Okay.
how I met Bill. But I knew Bill because of his public figure-ness. So he had been on a ballot that I had cast locally and provincially. So when I met him at the bar, I was just like, "Nice to meet you. Like, I've voted for you a couple times now." Yeah, and then we just hit it off talking about a lot of Green Party politics. And at the time, what were you at the time when we met then? So you had just ran.
We had just finished running provincially. I think.
Yeah. And so you still had a seat within the party and a position within the party, and so I was, just spitballing behind the bar about how we needed to get some more people and younger people and all kinds of people in this kind of mission, talking about these kinds of things about the future. And so we met over some beers across the street, actually, here, and that's the infamous best friends immediately, let's take over the world, pinky and brain,
Yeah.
And so craft beer, and I say we were just a bunch of craft beer tree hugger kind of gang, and so we just were friends, and things just kind of evolved in terms of starting a little business, Bill retiring, me always wanting to do something within this kind of space. So that's kind of how it all happened in the course of a couple years. Yeah. And now we're 1 year in, and
Feels pretty good.
Yeah.
We've done this through COVID, which is
Well, that's definitely a hurdle that most businesses up until this point certainly wouldn't have had to deal with.
Yeah.
So I mean that certainly complicates things. I mean, on top of the fact that I think as a rule generally restaurants have a very tough time in business.
Yeah.
Like I think the margins are very tight, right?
Yeah, totally. And they typically say within 3 years you can tell if it's going to fly or not.
Mm-hmm.
So within 1 year, we've done really, really well, and I think it was to our advantage as new business owners, especially like myself, doing as much that's required to run this place, especially not sourcing things just from the big guys, Cisco and GFS, and we're getting products from 100 different suppliers, right, directly from farms and directly from makers and brewers. So that time and attention definitely factors into the scale of effort that is required to run at a local establishment.
And I wish I had $1 for every time one of our clients has said that they really appreciate what we're doing, particularly with sourcing our stuff locally. That really resonates with the people who come through our doors anyway. It's an important part of who we are and what we want to do.
Yeah, and so back to just opening I've had a few conversations opening the business during a pandemic. It's like a blessing in disguise in a way, because we had these boundaries and perimeters that we had to kind of follow,
Right.
Which allowed us to kind of slowly dip our toes in, and now we're kind of swimming, and so it was a natural thing, but we never cared. We just said, this is something that is really important to us. This is something we really want to do. We're really passionate about it. So who cares about a pandemic? Do you stop living? Do you stop breathing? Do you stop? No, you don't. You accept the challenges that are going to come and the stress that inevitably did. But yeah, we're still here and standing, and everybody's had COVID now, and we're just ready to, keep slinging beers and making sandwiches and whatnot, right? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, that to me sort of highlights the thing that I really believe in too, where it's like you go and you do something because you want to do it or you think it's the right thing to do. And I mean, to hell with the consequences. I mean, just do it, because we could all sit around here all day and think of a million reasons not to do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, too scary, too expensive, too hard, whatever the case might be. And so, that's right. You got to really kind of let it hang out.
If you will never know if you don't try. Like, if you don't jump, and you don't fly. If you don't, and so for us, a big picture of it is the community and what it means to us on that green level, right? I use the word green because I think it's just like an easy way to sum up like the mission, right? But that goes with the love of the planet, the love of the earth, the respect we have for the air we breathe and everything that grows, life that sustains us, our wildlife, our neighbors, our everything, right? So being able to have this place and have these types of conversations is what we're here for, as much as enjoying a beautiful IPA. Like, don't get us wrong, right? It's nice to do both of those things. So,
and that's where the part of the name comes from. Like, know, KNOW. Know where your food comes from. Know your community. Know your clientele. It's really part of it. I had somebody phone me up the other day. Oh, do you do takeout? Well, we can do takeout. What are you thinking? Oh, well, skip the dishes. No, that's not who we are. We want to know who you are as our customer. We want you to know who we are as your supplier. We want to have black as opposed to red at the end of the day when we're looking at the balance sheet. But at the same time, we're interested in the community, and there are many things that Kaitlin and I think are in complete sync with. Personally, like, I've run for the Green Party. I ran to be mayor again with a climate. I like the idea of climate policy as opposed to green policy, because a lot of people hear the word green and they run away from the word. But I taught about it. I put solar panels on. I have an EV, and what we're doing here is my next step for me to walk the talk, to deal with local produce, to deal with local people. We found out we're slightly on the wrong side of the tracks to be considered downtown, but I still believe in the downtown, and I like to think that we are downtown still. So in my mind, it's another step in my evolution of being local, being climate oriented, and being in touch with my community.
Well, I mean, like the structures that are probably most famous in all of human history, the pyramids, they got big, wide bases, right? You got to have a solid foundation to build this big, beautiful pyramid. And the way you do that is you go out and you get involved directly in the community. You invest in the brick and mortar, what you got here, right? And you really try to make sure that you can source all your stuff from local people, because you're also now this concept. I can't remember the show it was, but it was on Netflix, and there's this guy Killer Mike. He's from Run the Jewels. It's like a rap duo. And anyways, he had this concept where he was talking about African Americans, and he said, how long does $1 stay in the African American community? And he said, well, first the money comes in because we get, you're working or whatever else. Then you go and you buy, say, some food. Well, it's already gone out of the community because all the stuff that you have access to is brought in a Walmart, whatever else. So that got me thinking. I said, if you want to build up your community, you have to invest in it. So he did an experiment where he said, how long can I keep my money in the black community? So he bought like only made by African American people phone. He bought like a bike that was only made by African American people. He did all these different things, and so the dollar would stay in the community longer. And so my thinking was, along that same line was, I go and make my money in the community. I go and give it to a local food producer, who will go in turn probably give it to another producer who he's getting resources off of. And so now maybe I've taken that dollar that I would have put in that would have went out almost immediately, and I've now had 3 hands touch that same dollar. And so it's a little more circular before it goes out.
I like it, Jordan. I like it.
That to me is the same principle as recycling or composting.
Yeah.
Right.
You're taking an output
Yeah.
that's being wasted, let's say for this context, and you're taking that output and you're putting it back in as an input. And we're cycling it around, we're getting another use, 2 uses out of it, and then it can leave the community because realistically we can't do everything.
Right.
There's always going to be something you don't do or something you can't do or whatever it is. And so you trade. But there's no reason, like how you guys are saying, how we can't just invest in the community and spread that dollar around.
Yeah.
But it's walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Yeah, yeah.
And the beautiful thing of that is you get to meet the people who produce the food.
Oh, yeah.
And they're as good as gold.
And you said there's about 100 that you're...
Oh, so that's definitely an over-exaggeration.
Okay.
But like, from all of the beer, the wine, the meat,
Right.
from the craft sodas to the lettuce, the cheese, the meats, the breads, you know, and then you guys and people like you and other people within the kind of same rhythm. There's just a lot of people that's constantly expanding, and that information's coming from everywhere. I don't know exactly what the number is, but everybody is.
If you're a
you know.
scientist, she's within an order of magnitude, and that's good.
Exact enough.
And how do you get in touch with a lot of the people that you buy?
I think we met a lot of people at the market.
Okay.
Sure, online, researching just who, and depends what other people are doing. So like we are we have a CSA membership through Family Roots, which is in Chelmsford.
Yeah.
And so they're like one of the few people that are farmers and growers that have this kind of program. So I like that we can become members of the farm, i.e. buy a membership at the beginning of the season, help them get started, right? So there's so many costs that go into the growing season that's come well before you ever get a cucumber in your hand, right?
Yeah.
So I love that we are contributing to them and the success of their farm, and they're, you know, organic, and they're doing everything like top notch. So every little situation and supplier has its own kind of story within that, why we're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the strong things that we have going for us too, is the internet, because it puts us in contact with so many people.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing. Like, there's a lot of these different food providers that we would have never known about. And then it's cool too, you start talking to other people, and you're like, oh yeah, I just got some I think it was pork we got from Triple Star Acres.
Yeah.
Cool.
And was at work, and I said, yeah, I just got this pork from Triple Star. I said, the porchetta we had, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And someone at work says, that's where I buy my pork.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool, right on. And then some
Yeah.
guy says, oh yeah, I got my stuff from Dalu Farms. I'm like, oh, hey, yeah, cool. Like, and it's kind of cool too when you're, and you get to kind of compare a little bit, like, oh, I had pork from here and it was good, and I had pork from here and it was okay, but I preferred this better.
Sure.
Because they're all going to do stuff a little different.
Totally. Honestly, like, I think all of the product that's coming from these local, so we get a lot of stuff from Dalu. We have gotten our turkeys from Triple Star. We've, you know, some guys in. Everybody's doing similar different things, but to me, how you cook it, how you treat it. I don't think I'd ever be the person that's like, even though we run a kitchen here, that would be like, but that pork, like, it's to me, because I know I just saw the pig or I just saw the I'm just happy there. Like, I didn't get this at Walmart or Costco, you know, so I don't really care if the fat texture was a bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's not to say that one's better than the other, because we all have different tastes, right? But like, to you.
We all have tastes and desires, but when was the last time you heard Triple Star have a recall on their turkey?
Never.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's the other thing too, like as we were talking about sort of know where your food comes from, being more conscious, you know, what is the real cost of, say, having our animals provided to us in the standard way that they're being provided to us? And I would argue that, you know, we're not doing our best to sort of steward these animals.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen some of those horror videos that they show from like PETA or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should do that to any living thing.
No.
I mean, so when you can see these farms and you see these happy ducks quacking around, or you got these nice pigs and they're in their pit and they're having a good time, that's a happy animal. And maybe it's a little on the woo-woo side, but I think you are what you eat. And I think if that animal has a happy, healthy life, you're probably getting happy, healthy food.
Yeah.
I taught a course for a number of years called Diet, Food Choice, and the Environment, trying to link the impacts of the Western diet to environmental concerns. And, a lot of the time students say, well, I can only afford to buy my meat at Walmart or Costco. And I would try to get them, well, we'll try to turn that equation around. Don't buy the cheapest. What you need to do is say, why is this inexpensive food so cheap?
Mhm.
And when you realize that maybe the chicken wings that you're buying at some place, I won't mention a name, but I could, they're coming from Brazil. They're coming from Brazil where there are no environmental standards, there are no human labor standards. You see the video, the guys are smoking their cigarettes while they're slaughtering chickens. You're getting the chicken wings from Brazil, shipped all the way here, and you can have 2-for-1 wings. Well, you know what? How can that be good for anybody?
Yep. Well, it's the same thing even with your clothing. Like people would say,
fast fashion.
Yeah. You go to the store and you buy a new shirt. You're like, oh, I can buy 10 of them because they're only $3 a piece or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, that cost was paid by somebody. It wasn't paid by you, but somebody paid for that.
Yeah.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think when it might come with a bigger price tag, but then when you are conscious of where that thing came from, who made it, you're going to take better care of it, and or you're taking better care of yourself, and you just have that mental awareness so that all of this stuff has an environmental price tag, and so you're shifting your mind into a way of living that is less harmful for everyone and everything. And I think that's the point of having less and even eating less, right? Do we need to have this huge, massive, roast beef sandwich, like that, but that it's whatever, right? So I think it's just how we are reshaping the way we think as well.
Yeah. Well, even that idea of like, say, our portion size. Like, so we went to Europe because my wife's family's from Portugal, and you go there and the portion sizes are very different. Now, it's not like Portugal in particular, I think, is a little on the heavier side of portions versus I think other places in Europe.
Yeah.
But still, it's because I think over here, earlier on, we started associating lots of food with luxury. Now, I think that might be an indication of sort of where we come from in the past.
Historically, too,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we were like, you got a big plate, you eat like a king, right?
Well, and then they would vomit, would they not? Was
Yeah.
this
Well, I've heard of that.
In the middle, but still, you were rich, you could afford to gorge your face, and then literally you were so full, like that is.
And we could go from the plate to the car, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're nobody unless you get a Range Rover or a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
If you're driving a little EV or a very efficient internal combustion engine car, you're nobody.
Mm-hmm.
In our society, big plate of food, you only eat half of it, the rest goes in the garbage. We compost, but the rest goes in the garbage. Oh, look how important I am. Look how affluent I am.
Yeah.
I'm so wealthy. I can waste this money on $2.21 a liter gas, or roast beef that I only ate half of.
Yeah. Well, that was even like the idea that I've heard of behind having like a big front lawn.
Right.
And a big front lawn was the idea I've
Huge.
heard. Now, is this true or not?
I
Was
think you're
basically
right.
you had fertile land that you didn't need to use because you had people growing your
Yuval
food.
Harari spoke a lot about.
Oh, so we talked about that?
Yeah,
It was a flex.
It was like the first chapter.
Yeah, it was like the gentry. They were just like, look how much that could all grow food. Don't need it.
No.
I don't need it, exactly.
Yeah, and then, well, the funny thing is too, because I always think this is funny because I love history.
Yeah.
And so when you look at history, we always presume now, because we're here, and we're, as far as we know, the furthest growth of the human experience,
Yeah.
we think, well, we're sophisticated, and we wouldn't make all these silly mistakes those people made back then. When you describe the big car, the gas burning, the big plate, this is all big ape behavior.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, I got big table,
Yeah.
I got big car, I'm big man?
Yeah.
And you're like, well,
Yeah.
but it's all the status symbolizing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're signaling. You're
And I
like,
guess that's what I mean, right? Like it's time for us to become a little bit more modest and
Yeah, a
the
little
way
humble.
we consume, humble and
Yeah.
consume less in general.
Well, and then so like even looking at like what are your real needs, like because another thing people always assume, well, you have to eat 3 meals a day. It's like, well, Do you? It's nice. I'm not going to tell you, I don't get hungry around lunch. But I mean, then you start looking at like fasting and all the possible health benefits and stuff like that.
Sure.
And I work with a guy and he practices Ramadan, and so he won't eat all day long. I'm like, oh, well, you don't need to eat. So I would mess around with that, like, you know, skip a couple of meals and whatever else. And yeah, you do feel good. Now it's a little bit of discipline and stuff like that. But I was eating one meal a day and I wasn't starving. It changes your schedule a little bit, but I mean, yeah. And so then you got to wonder, like, you know, how much food are we wasting in that way? And then if you look at sourcing your food locally, where you have a sort of set amount, you know, you're going to get, and then you can kind of plan your diet around that, versus going to the grocery store, where you see they throw out food all the time. And only recently, I think, they started putting that output back as an input with Loop.
Yeah.
And that to me just seemed like a dead ringer for a winner. Like, how come we haven't always been doing that?
I know.
Like, we've just been throwing this beautiful stuff.
I know. It's crazy.
And here's a little theory I have. So you ever heard of terra preta in like the Amazon? Okay, so terra preta basically means black earth.
Okay.
All right. And so they found these spots where they had like thick, like 6 feet of black soil in the Amazon. Like, this is like the best soil in the world. It's the most fertile. It's great. They were trying to figure out how are these mines doing it, and then they would look around and they would find these like clay shard pieces and stuff like that, and they'd find like look like refuse pile. And I got thinking about it. I said, I bet you that was their dump. And like us, they would take like say their like, you know, your what do you call it? Your bedpan, like, you know, not your bedpan, but like, you know, in the nighttime if you were sleeping, you'd pee in a pot or whatever, and you throw it out after. So that's why I figure you probably got human waste going in there, your natural waste products, and all these clay shards is probably the containers you're carrying it in.
Yeah.
They threw it away and left it, forgot about it. Come back a few hundred years later, you got 6 feet of black soil. Like, that to me just made sense, because I think about our composting and throwing food into the dump all the time.
Yeah.
Like, if we weren't throwing all that toxic stuff in there, I bet you could find good soil under there.
Yeah, sure enough.
I don't know if that bears out logically, but in my head, I thought that was a good idea.
Yep.
Oh, it's scientifically sound.
Well, hey, look at that.
We compost as much as we can. Bill and I were actually chatting via text this morning about our compost, and you know, it's growing, we're getting busier and stuff, but so we make a really, really huge effort to compost as much as we can. And a few months ago, well, a month ago, a gentleman was working with us, and his parents had chickens. So for the first almost year that we've been running, we've been feeding these chickens our kitchen scraps. So like everything, right? So it just made me really happy then.
Maybe that's why we have more compost than we did a month ago.
Definitely, yeah, and we're just generally busier.
Yeah.
But so we're feeding these chickens, and then they come and drop eggs off for us, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Again, that closing the loop, and the saddest thing about working in restaurants is the food waste. It's just it's just astronomical. People do really good here, and again, so our motto of just snacks and small plates, we don't have these massive entree sizes, which leads into less food waste, because we're giving you less on the plate. You're gonna more chances you're gonna finish it, right? So
I think it's definitely a mentality thing too, though, because even like the way I grew up is like you don't waste food ever.
Yeah, same.
So whenever I would go to restaurants, I always made sure I ate everything, even though it was way too much. But just the people that just like leave a bunch, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, I think that's too, like, I'm guilty of doing this. Like, there'll be a night where I'm feeling snacky, and like, I don't need to have the chips and then the cookies. But I'm like, I already had the chips.
Human. Yeah, you're human.
Yeah, well, some of those times I'm a weaker human than I could be. That's me giving me a pass, right?
Fair.
But I think we all kind of do that, and that's an interesting thing, because we're sort of talking about that and using less. Are we sort of recommending, in a sense, or I guess theorizing about an austerity that we think people should sort of adopt, or?
It's a different lifestyle. I get this frequently, not necessarily with the food, but with electric cars. Everybody has the same 12 or 20 questions to ask me about electric cars and how electric cars are bad. The classic is, how are you going to go to Toronto? Well, in this time of the year, full charge, I could probably get to the outskirts of Toronto without a charge. But I drive to Parry Sound. Twigs has an Ivy charger station. I drive in, I plug the car, I go in, have a sandwich and a coffee, 40 minutes later, like, and I don't want to woof it down.
Mhm.
I know my car's charging. So I come out and away I go. People say, well, I'm not going to spend 40 minutes waiting
Right.
for my car to charge. I want to spend 3.5 pumping expensive gasoline in there and go. It's a different way of living. And I found it important when I was riding a motorcycle, that it's a different way of interacting with transportation. You have a small tank on a motorcycle, so you're not going to go very far, maybe 200, 250 kilometers, but you're always exposed, you're always in the environment. You feel it, you smell it, you sense it at many levels. And I think that, the fact that you have to stop, or you might have to stop on a 400 or 500 kilometer journey with an EV to charge up, it allows you a chance to connect again with wherever you are charging. And you're much more aware of your trip, what you're doing. If you're just pumping gas into your car, all you worry about is how much that tank of gas costs you. Yes, you have to take a little more time and plan it out, and I've got 4 or 5 apps here to help me figure out where the next charging station is, and my car will tell me as well. But it's a different way of traveling. And to bring it back to the food, I think we need to get away from the idea that, having something, nice and big, look how important it is. But it's like the big Lamborghini. Look, I'm wealthy enough to have this pot belly. No, we don't need that, and we shouldn't have that, because that leads to health concerns and expenses for society with respect to health care. But we've been lulled into the idea that more is always better, bigger is better, and that's not what we need. Think of trying to buy a house. We're really whipping along now, but we're here. We have pretty good landlords here. They're good to us. They build houses that are now going for $1 million, 3,200 square feet and bigger. Who really needs that? And if you look at those houses and you look at the furniture, you need oversized furniture to fill your living room, because if you put a regular sized couch in there, it's dwarfed. Like we've just morphed into this bigger is better without really thinking it through. And again, back to us, I think we provide really high quality food. We've got a lovely environment, and nobody has said to me that they're not full or they didn't enjoy their meal when they walk out the door. I haven't heard it yet. So it's trying to break. I think everybody needs to break away from what society has brainwashed into thinking is right and what we need. And we're different. I had a guy in last night. Oh, you don't have a burger? He's looking at no, we don't have a burger. So you want a burger? They got really good burgers across the street. Just go see Dave. But that's not what we are.
Yeah. Well, you gotta really know who you are and know what your kind of niche is and what you're trying to do. And so that makes me think, though, too, because you mentioned like the society has sort of taught us to be such a certain way, and I think about this a lot. And so when we're talking about a society being shaped, who are we supposing is shaping the society? What is really shaping the wants or the needs of the people within the society?
That's a really good question, Jordan. I do not believe that there's a group of old white guys in a room somewhere pulling strings saying this is what's going to happen. I think it's got to do with profit and people trying to maximize what they can earn on the backs of other people. And this is something that I feel, I don't know if it differentiates Kaitlin and I from the average restaurateur or not. Yes, we have expenses. We have a payroll to meet. We have to pay our suppliers. But Kaitlin and I are not motivated to the point where we need 2 Lamborghinis out here in the parking lot. So I think a lot of what's happening is it's capital, and it's trying to become wealthy, show your wealth. And that results in a race to the bottom as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure if it really fits neatly. But when I've talked about some of the contradictions that are in part of the capitalist system, when you look at a corporation, we'll say an automaker, they're going to maximize their profit by minimizing their labor costs. They might invest capital in high-tech robots or whatever. And so that they can do that. And so, okay, great. So Dodge does it, Ford does it, GM does it, Tesla does it, and they're all driving down the cost of production using robots. Simple, very simple simplification. But at the end of the day, what are the robots buying? What are the robots contributing to society? Nothing. We've eliminated people from the process, but the shareholders are making money. So it's not, oh, well, let's control society this way or that way. It's a few people trying to maximize their return on investment, as far as I'm concerned. And capitalism has so many, and this is where Marx and Engels were so right, capitalism has so many internal contradictions that it's a race to the bottom eventually. You're going to have a few people, the 0.5% or whatever they are, and the rest of us, we're going to pay the price for the very few.
So, I mean, say in a place like Canada, where at least up until fairly recently, we had a pretty robust middle class. What sort of allows that to happen here versus other places in the world that might, say, have different economics?
I think a really big part of, say, Canada and Sudbury, I think is really clear in a place like Sudbury, is the importance of a union. Okay. The importance of a group of people looking out for each other, and sort of an in-between, between the worker and the owners of capital. I'm sounding like a Marxist. It's been a long time, but anyway, it's coming back a little too easily.
Yep.
But I really do think that unions, particularly in the case of things like mining, where the jobs are life-threatening, you need some safety net in order to save or protect the workers, and to make sure that the workers are getting a fairer share of the fruits of their labor. So I think unions are important. I think, and one of the challenges that Canada has, particularly with North American free trade or whatever it's called these days, is Canada has health standards, has environmental standards. Mexico, the United States. Mexico has barely any. The United States has some. So again, it's a race to the bottom. If Canadian manufacturers want to be competitive with Mexican producers or American producers, we actually have to cut back on our costs, and generally that might be our healthcare, it might be our education system, it might be even the way our governments work. And so we have, again, you said this too many times, but the race to the bottom. So that's where I think unions have a really important role in to remind us and to help us not fall into that. But then it comes back to buying local. If you're going, oh, well, I need, I don't know what, because I don't shop at Walmart, but we're going to buy a glass, go to Walmart because it's cheaper at Walmart than it is to talk to somebody local. Why don't I can get to buy a glass locally, but made locally? Yes, it is cheaper to buy it from Walmart. But your idea of the dollar through the black community, it's gone. That money's gone to Arkansas or wherever the Walton family, it's not the Walton, anyway, where they live, as opposed to spending a little more. And this is one thing that Kaitlin and I, we bought, I'm rambling on, we bought sweaters, t-shirts to sell. We were very particular about where we bought them. So we found a local company who sourced t-shirts that were made in Edmonton. Okay, it's not really local, but they're not from Honduras, they're not from China, they were made in Edmonton. They bought them in Edmonton, they were printed in Sudbury. Are our t-shirts more expensive than you can get at another place? You're looking for merchandise? Yes, they are, but there's a reason for that. But I think so many of us have been beaten over the heads that we're going for the cheapest product as opposed to understanding the ethics and that circulation of the dollar that's so important. We forget those critical things. And it's one of the, it's part of what Kaitlin and I are trying to do here is source locally, know your community, know where your food comes from, and from t-shirts to the lilacs that are in there. Those are handpicked by our team and made into something that's kind of cool. You're not going to get that at any of the big chains. I keep calling it St. Louis, but it's Joe Louis. You're not going to get that at Joe Louis. You're only going to get that here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really true. And yeah, it's an interesting thing because my, let's call it educational journey, I'm predisposed to, when I hear Marx, I start thinking, oh, Marx. That's just my background of where I come from.
Fair enough.
And where I grew up, I never worked union jobs or nothing.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I can't deny that certainly unions served a purpose and certainly do serve a purposes in a lot of situations. But what I see sometimes, or what I have the impression of, I should rather say, is that sometimes unions seem to run the risk of becoming like the big corporations in the sense that they lobby governments. Because one thing that I see is, and this is actually to the point of Marx, I guess, that capital is power, that these corporations or financial bodies that get together have a lot of lobbying power, and I end up seeing that really the local people don't typically end up having a lot of say in the end. And that's where I wonder sometimes if we're not being, because gets back to the original question where I was asking what leads our sort of, what we like, our tastes, where we're going and that kind of thing. And I wonder how much of it is we vote for people to get what we want versus the people lobbying the government to instill in us what we think we want. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of going another step from what you're saying in the same way where we have these people with lots of capital who are going to lobby the government for, say, less severe restrictions on vehicles because they want to produce a gas guzzler or whatever it is, right? Yeah. And that's one example, or another example might be some oil company who doesn't want to have to pay for their spill or whatever the case might be. So I always wonder about that, right?
Do you know that an oil spill actually adds to the GNP in a country?
Well, see, and this was a thing I heard about recently too, because that's got to do with basically the GDP, if I understand this, and I probably don't. But it's got a lot to do with basically how many products are being produced and bought. But it's not necessarily an indication of the quality of life within the country.
Exactly.
So that's one of those sort of numbers where they'll tell you, oh, we're doing really good as a country. Look at our GDP. It's great. And then you look at these dying communities and you wonder, well, how is it that we're better, but I look around and I don't see it? Yep. And so that's where, like, to me, what kind of makes me have an aversion to the Marxism thing is more the top-down part of it. Yeah. And that's where I like, so I'm not against the communitarian aspect, but I like to see it ground up, right? Because I'm really big on the idea of consent, right? Like I don't like people using violence to get people to do anything for any reason. Like I'm all about, like, we can have an agreement, we can work together, that's no problem, but you don't force me and I won't force you. We're all consenting adults, whatever, fine. So when I see that, the bottom up to me is the only sort of solution I see that merges both of these philosophies in a way, where it's like we can work together, we can value each other's labor, but we have to start consciously at the root level. And the top-down level, I see it as being efficacious in the sense that you can't deny the power of the state to make people do things. I just don't like the coercive element. So that's where I like seeing this kind of stuff. This really gives me hope for sort of people getting involved, because I think if we really are going to see a change in the world, I think we are the change we want to see in the world. I think we have to get involved, and that's...
You're dead right on so many aspects, Jordan. You've introduced 14 things. I'm trying to remember them all and to incorporate them into what I want to say. But I think if we go, we start with your concern, and I share it, about is government working for the voter or is government working for whomever?
Right.
One of the big problems that I see is first past the post. Okay. So that if we were to go to proportional representation, so that if we had 5% of the population in Ontario voting Green, and I should know how many seats there are in the Ontario legislature, but I don't know. So that would mean 5% of those seats would be green. That scares the hell out of the big parties, the conservatives and the liberals in particular, because they no longer have a chance to win it all with 30% of the vote. It's all geography. You know, I have to be careful because I can, you know, I'm a geographer, I can go down that road very quickly.
Yeah.
But I think we need proportional representation would be a big step in changing that so that everybody felt that their vote was worth something. Like when you look at elections now, people in Northern Ontario, it doesn't matter because the GTA is going to win.
Yeah.
People in BC, federally, oh, it doesn't matter what I vote because people in Ontario are going to decide the election, or maybe Quebec. Proportional representation would change that dynamic completely, and I think we would feel far more confident that our voice was being heard. Like if I knew 5% of the legislature in Ontario or 5% in Ottawa was green, it's more than Mike Schreiner. Like poor Mike Schreiner's there on his own in Ontario. We've got Elizabeth May essentially on her own in Ottawa. What does one person have to do? And it's that lopsided thing that happens with first past the post or plurality. You have 5 parties running. Essentially, all you need is 21% of the vote to end up being the person, the party. And then we have party politics, the lobbying that goes along. So I'm not sure who's listening to this, but I ran for mayor. If you look carefully at the last election, 2018 election, you look at the people who supported Brian Bigger, Zulich, the maximum amount of money that you could contribute, and then you go a little deeper. Oh, this person. You know what? They're married to Zuliches. A little guy like Crumplin, okay. I did well considering what I was doing, but what you think is Zulich, Ked? No wonder that's what the city thinks it wants. Yeah. And that's part of the problem. Again, it's a plurality system even at the municipal level. And that makes it really difficult for the average person to feel that their vote matters, for them to get engaged to the level where they're going to read what everybody is talking about. A lot of people just figure, oh well, it doesn't matter. There's no difference between a conservative, a liberal, maybe even an NDP. If you're anti-union, you're never going to look at the NDP. And that's one of the things that I find problematic with party politics. And it's, I'm a green guy, excuse me, and it's one of the reasons I like Mike Schreiner. He's moved from talking about a green economy to talking about a climate economy. And to me, that makes far more sense if you're thinking, well, what is it that we're going to do to improve or save the climate? Maybe some conservative has a great idea. If you're talking about a climate economy, we can make room for that conservative's idea. But if we're talking about green, orange, blue, and red, it's hard to have those ideas accepted.
Well, and then the way you were sort of laying out the sort of voting that had happened here, I think that's reflective also of the voting that happens at a bigger level, which gives me the impression that rather than having a democracy, which by all intents and purposes it looks like we live in, it seems to me a little more reminiscent of an oligarchy, where basically you got a lot of people grouping together with lots of money kind of running the country, and to the peasants come whatever may. And that for me is what sort of makes me sort of disheartened with politics, where like we have an election coming up and I'm like, I don't think I'm even going to vote because there's no one up there that represents me. And so I'm interested in these different sort of solutions that we can work together on. And I also see, like you're saying, where you're talking about a climate economy, maybe it is a matter of semantics where we can be like, no, listen, we can figure out a way to make people money and move in a more green direction. And we can do it in a way that doesn't sort of alienate the worker or put undue stress on them. Because that's the other thing too, like, it's really hard to try to tell a guy like, listen, you're just going to have to take a pay cut of 20% or whatever it might be, or you just got to downsize. Because right or wrong, we're enculturated with this idea that we should have a big house, we should have the big car and everything else. And, we could be right, but it's really hard to tell that guy, you got to go without. Because it's not it's not exactly abundantly clear to him. And that's the other problem too when we're talking about a global issue. I sort of relate it almost as being like in 1984, they're always at war with Eurasia and they're always at war with East Asia. It's this sort of enemy that you never totally see, and it's a conflict that you never know will get resolved. And so like I look at that and I think like, you know, the average guy, to him, this is some faraway enemy that's got almost nothing to do with him. And even though you could show him a chart, you could show him all these things in the world, he's like, yeah, well, you know, I got to make enough money to feed my kids, and I want to have a little bit of time to do my thing on the weekend because it's kind of what I live for. And I mean, it is a matter of probably we have to shift cultural values, but I mean, for a lot of guys, like where I grew up in a small town, and small towns are infamous for this, they drink too much is the idea. And partly the idea is because, well, there's not a whole lot else to do, and it's how we get together and we socialize. It's our social lubricant, right? But it's one of those things where, so that guy, he wants to make sure he's got enough money for a little bit of beer on the weekend, maybe a little wacky-tobacky if that's what he's into, and he wants to hang out with his friends, a little bit of gas for the boat and whatever, and that guy lives for that. And like, it's like a head and a heart kind of thing. My head says, you know, we probably got to move in this other direction. The other part of me, the heart says like, how much of the human being are we cutting off when we do this in the way? Because are we sort of, because I worry as a culture that we've identified ourselves with these things we do and these things we have. And I worry that when we start cutting these things away, that people are going to feel as if we're burning off parts of them. Right or wrong. I'm sort of speculating on what I'm thinking might be a reason why a person wouldn't go gung-ho on this, right? For an average working kind of guy. And that's why I love having these conversations, because I'm torn in those ways.
No, I'm loving this conversation, but I'm also well aware, Jordan, two women at the table haven't said much in a while. And no. I would like to hear what you two are thinking, because one of the things that I wonder about is where we might be if more women were really involved in decision making. What are the things? Like, I'm an old white guy, you're not an old white guy, but ladies, what do you see? What can you suggest the boys are doing wrong? There's probably a lot.
Go ahead, Kaitlin.
Well, we're talking about, sorry, recapping here. I'm thinking, you know, I think as the human species, in terms of coexisting together, we just need to understand that the way we've been thinking it and the actions that we have that follow that is just not the way to go about it anymore. So I think it's just always going to be the awareness that we have. The awareness that we have is all that we have at the end of the day. So if we're taking things away that we identify with, so if we want less, if we need to have less to survive in a healthier environment, then I think that understanding the fact that these things do not indeed identify us is a very juicy topic.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is where it naturally morphs into. And I think that by people understanding that the things that they have do not create their happiness or their identity, or that dealing with a lot less and just the mere, you know, being alive and existing and breathing air is quite sufficient enough if we know how to do that. So in my background, in my life experience of 31 years, I've spent a lot of time meditating, and I think that that should be a continuing part of the conversation, especially when we're dealing with the environment. I don't need to go into religion because it has nothing to do with religion, but I think understanding that our minds are a huge force field in terms of what we see and what we create in this world. There's just a lot to dive into there.
Yeah. Well, even just at the end when we were talking about, you know, losing a piece of themselves, if that's the case, then it's really like you're saying, the meditation, coping. How are people going to cope if people don't have coping mechanisms, or if it's alcohol, like you said, then we're not moving ahead, right? We're having other type of concerns. So how do people, gain these coping skills so that we could move forward, and then they can consciously understand kind of what we're talking about?
Well, and then when you said that religion has nothing to do with it, I wonder with that sometimes, because I'm always struck by this phrase I remember from Nietzsche, and he says, like, we have killed God, and how will we ever wash the blood off our hands? Like, how will we ever basically reconcile what we've done? And I think that's a fascinating thing, because we, I think, might be, at least in our written history, one of the first human civilizations to really be without God, in a sense. Like, generally, we're pretty secular over here. And that's not to say there's not a lot of religion here. But I wonder, say, in that value system where we've started to identify ourselves with our possessions, is that because we've lost some sort of core ethic with or around which we sort of center our lives? Like, I'm not saying pick one religion or the other, but I'm saying, is there some maybe inherent value in having a sort of metaphysics or superstructure which you can build all these things on? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I still think it separates us, though, and I think for me, just the idea and the understanding and the practice of meditation keeps us all the same. So, you'd be just religion to religion, whatever it is, as long if that includes harming somebody, that's not ideal for prosperity, right? So
well that's another interesting thing though too, because like that's another critique I'll often hear of religion, is that, like, a lot of bad things have happened in the name of religion, and certainly they have. I mean, the first Christian crusade starts in like 1100 or something like that. It's the Albigensian crusade, and they kill all these people. There's some famous quote attributed to a bishop. A scout went down into the village, and he come back up, and he said to the guy, so we got Catholics, we got Gnostic Christians, we got Muslims down there, and we got Jewish people. How do you want me to root out the Gnostic heretics? That's who they were after. And he said, kill them all and God will know his own. Now, from our modern world view, we hear that and like, well, that's barbarism. You go down there and you slaughter all these innocent people. But are we sort of looking at it from our modern bias and not considering that a person back then might have actually believed that all of the faithful would have been sent to heaven, and therefore there was no wrongdoing in what he did? Now that gets back to how earlier we were talking about rational beings versus rationalizing beings. And that's one of those things that I kind of wonder about, is like, I guess that's not exactly proving my point. I'm talking about a violent thing that happened. I guess what I'm talking about is like, here's what I was getting at. So a lot of our sort of way we look at the world and our ethics comes from that sort of religious system that does have all that negative baggage that comes along with it. But isn't it also sort of how we orient ourselves in what we now think to be a positive direction? Like, are we kind of sort of dropping off the good with the bad, in a sense? Like, let's take, for example, like the Ten Commandments, one of those things like, thou shalt not kill.
Right.
And now we think of that as being very self-evident.
Yeah.
But let's say we're back in Stone Age days, and you've got a rock I want.
Right.
Why don't I just smash you over the head and take it?
Right. I think, though, religion and belief and faith in things that are bigger than yourself and you and I think faith in general and hope and love and all of these things are very important. Okay. And if that comes from practicing religion, please, by all means. Like, I have no problem with that. But I really, I guess, I suppose, just drive home the concept of just understanding our minds. Like, I think human evolution is naturally going to go into this way where if we are able to experience what is going on in our minds, that we can really create the things that we see and the things that we want to, and I outside of that, I just think that's a huge turning page for understanding.
I definitely agree with that, and I think that it's interesting because I think you're seeing a version of that in the sort of new age movement that happens, and that's, again, we were talking about earlier, these overlapping Venn diagrams of people who occupy this space. You'll hear a lot of people who have these sort of, as a modern person, you might regard as a silly idea, when they're saying this plant has a certain essence that does this thing for you, or they're saying, happy plants make happy people. There's this idea that it's almost like an animism in a sense, where it's like everything has a life force to it, and positive life force, bringing that into your system is a good thing. Now, in a woo-woo kind of way, you could say, well, that's not practical or logical, but in a sense, you're taking the know-where sort of essence and you're knowing where your food all comes from, so you're being more conscious. So it's like ascribing a consciousness to that thing allows you to be more conscious in your interactions with it. So like, it's one of those things where I wonder if it's maybe because we've gotten to have a bad taste in our mouth for the word religion, because to me, I'm of the opinion that I'm not so certain we're not a culture that still has a religion. I think we've sort of disconnected ourselves from a sort of a transcendent sort of metaphysics, and we've sort of superseded ourselves in place of the creator. But I think it's still a religion at the end of the day. Like, I think it's like we think we're not religious, but indeed we are.
Right,
because we still have a lot of irrational beliefs, again, going back to that rationalizing versus rational being. And so, like, I wonder, and that's another thing I wonder too, with even with this green movement, I wonder too if it's also some part like filling that religious sort of hole left in our lives in a way too. Aside from the fact that we should be responsible custodians of the earth. I mean, that's a granted. But I wonder, I mean, kind of getting off into the weeds here, but it's just a thing I find interesting. Do you have any thought on that?
Crumplin?
Custodians of the earth is an interesting phrase, because that implies we're not of the earth. I like to think that we are part of nature, not custodians of it. So that's something that's in my mind, and Jordan, you and I could have a lot of discussions over a lot of beer, anyhow. The other thing, like Kaitlin and I, we've had a few talks like this. For me, there's a big difference between being religious and being spiritual. I was born and raised Roman Catholic. Okay. I did all the stuff up to getting married. I didn't get married in the Roman Catholic faith, but I was schooled in Roman Catholic and in Catholicism. I consider myself a recovering Catholic because the way the priests, the nuns, the whole system shaped me. I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to get out from underneath that religious armor that they built on me. But I've been fortunate enough to live in Northern Ontario since 1994. It's a long time. I've been fortunate enough to have been invited into Anishinaabe culture a few times. And for me, that whole idea of, my word for it is spirituality, to think of nature, to think that we are part of it. We're not custodians of the planet, we are part of the planet. That makes far more sense to me. But I think it's something that's very difficult for the average person who's worrying about his mortgage and paying for his F-150 payment every month. They find that very difficult. But again, I don't think any of the four of us are average. Okay, given what we've been sharing, we're not average. We're different. I don't want to say better than average, but we're different. We're looking at life differently. It's more complex. There's magic to life. And I've talked a little bit earlier about, the scientists would say X or Y. Yes, but there's still magic that science can't explain. And that's part of, I think, what we have to embrace as a human species. And we're human beings. We're here. We're experiencing each other. We're experiencing the environment. And a lot of time, I think we've been hoodwinked into participating in the big economic plan so that we can, in fact, have some people benefit a lot. But I also see a real parallel between, so we're talking a little bit of political parties, different colors, and religions, the different. So at some point in time, with the Reformation, I don't know, when priests in the Christian context became less important than, they weren't the kings, but the political bodies, the prime ministers, if you will. And so we shifted that way of thinking that, you know, there was the equivalent of the Pope, the bishop, the priest, whatever, to, you know, the mayor, the MPP, the MP. And it's the same framework, but we've applied it to something that was non-religious. But it's probably about economics and certain degree control. The control was there for both situations. The economics was there for both. You know, to get a plot of land in Quebec, the seigneurial system, you had to, I won't say it because I don't know where this is going, but you had to appease the bishop in order to get your piece of land. And you know, it's not much different than what's going on with, or what might happen with the KED, as far as I'm concerned. It's really difficult to get the average person to move away from how are they going to make their mortgage payment, how are they going to make sure kids healthy, how are they going to pay for their new car, oh well, you know, the environment, or knowing where your food comes from, or was this chicken that I'm eating tonight, did it have a chicken's life, or did it live 36 days in darkness to become the biggest breasted chicken you can imagine? Unfortunately, it's the latter. But nobody worries about that. They're just worrying about the cost. You know, go to Costco. Yes, we have a friend who runs a restaurant in southern Ontario, southern Sudbury, and when we were doing our Thanksgiving thing, he was telling me, oh, you know, turkey was really expensive. I paid $1.99 a pound. I won't say his name. I said, you know how much we paid? We paid $6.99 a pound. But that turkey lived a turkey's life for, you know, was it a year? I don't know. But it wasn't 36 days in a dark room with 10,000 other turkeys that, you know, he could pay $1.99 a pound for. You know, we're talking about a lot of things. I'm rambling. There's so many things that I want to say because this reminds me of being in the classroom again, and I missed that part. The reports to the dean and the departmental meetings, no, I cared. Yeah, I hated those. I didn't make any friends in those. But engaging with people who are interested and thinking, this is sweet.
Well, I think that's the shift we're all focusing on and passionate about here, right? Is like you said, that we're part of nature. You know, because all those people worried about all the other things like the mortgage, the car, all of that, they're so apart from nature, you know? They go into their homes, they don't even go outside, right? And it's a shift.
Is that not, though, in part because of exactly where we live, though? Like, I mean, I'm just kind of asking this question. How easy is it to be aware of and living in nature when, say, you live in a suburb or a city apartment?
Yeah, I don't think it comes naturally, really. Like, I think you have to really be conscious of it. Like, I don't think, you know, if you go, it's a disruption of your routine, right? Because if you have a routine of going to work and doing this and doing that, you're not going to really pay attention to that. But I think you really have to, like, step out of your routine and, you know, meditation, like you said, like a lot of that kind of stuff, just thinking and being conscious. I think that's where you get there.
I agree completely.
We all live under the same sky too, so nature is just above, you know. So if you're living in a big suburban metropolis, you know, if you're living downtown Toronto, it's not to say that you can't still find nature and still connect back to it, you know. It's a shift in the mental capacity, I think, to see more than what, you know, of course, a field and a forest, it's very obvious, right? You're in a natural habitat, but I think expanding our eyes and opening them up a little bit broader to understanding what nature is all around us, even if you are downtown Los Angeles, LA, China, Asia, you know what I mean? So, I don't know.
Well, this is one of the things that I respect a lot about you. If I was 31, when I was 31, I still didn't have the view of the world, the view of nature that you have. And that's one of the things that I have hope for the people coming behind me. And I think that's so important, Kaitlin. Like, you lived in Toronto. I hate Toronto, but I grew up in London, love Montreal, but I loved it. I live here. I've spent 9 years in Sault Ste. Marie. I'm almost 20 years in Sudbury. I love being this close to nature. I live, you know, a half a minute walk from Lake Ramsey. and the geese and the loons and the muskrats and all of that life. But for some reason, I'm able to disengage a little bit from the rat race, for the better, for lack of a better word, and experience a little bit about nature. It's not impossible to do in Toronto, or I'm sure it's not impossible to do in Tokyo, but it becomes more and more difficult. You actually have to make room for it. But here, you know, what makes Sudbury different? And you talked about that a little bit earlier, Jordan. I think one of the things that makes it different here and so appealing to me is that, you know, I'm at most 10 minutes from nature, and real nature, not a cultivated park in the center of town. And that allows us an opportunity to engage, I think, at a real human level with what's out there and what's going on. And I think it's becoming this is something that I think the pandemic has changed. And I'm talking to Ron Arnold a couple weeks ago about it. People who are living in southern Ontario, the pandemic has taught them that the glass and concrete and chrome can be a jail, as opposed to being, oh, look how important I am, I can afford this. And one of the reasons our house prices are getting so crazy here in this town is because people have learned that and their employers have learned that they can work remotely, and so people are looking for areas where there is more nature available. And so for the average Sudburian or Sault Ste. Marieite or Timmonsite, or whatever we call ourselves, that's hurting us as individuals if you're trying to get into the housing market, as you well know. But I think it's teaching a lot of people that there's more to life than what we've been led to believe. But there are far too many people on the planet to live the way we are here in Sudbury. You go to India, you go to China, you go to sub-Saharan Africa. There's not enough space. There's not enough loveliness for everyone to live the way we are. We're very fortunate living here, and I'm not sure people understand.
Well, yeah, it certainly is like a real privilege to live in a country like, Canada. I think we have 75 or 80% of the world's fresh water.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like, we have incredible resources. We have beautiful nature. We have all these kind of things. And I was struck recently by this idea of mimesis, where it's like most people actually are kind of acting out things they see. It's a lot more monkey see, monkey do than we originally think. Like, it's like, because I'm thinking of this along with the sort of archetype in the sense that we all believe that what you do is you go and you get a good job, then you buy a house, then you get the truck, then you get the boat, you get the cabin on the lake, and on you go, right? That's the sort of archetype that we've constructed for the Canadian dream.
I always knew it wasn't that way. I remember being a kid and traveling to Barrie. Often, I had an aunt and uncle living there, and I'd go hang out with my cousins, and at like the age of 10, I'm like, why are they building all these houses that look the same? And I was like, something's up here, and like, why is this constantly just growing over these years? And I'm like, there's something that that doesn't click for me here, you know? Yeah. And I've literally always been against the grain in terms of all of the houses and I constantly ask myself and then others, like, but why? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what is that? Like, is that all there is here? Like, is this it? Like,
well, because what I'm kind of getting at with that is I wonder is, like, are we able to develop a new archetype for people to sort of meme, let's say?
Right.
To meme, like, sort of to copy or reflect back to us, right? Like, do we need to create a new archetype, let's say?
I think so. I think it's in the process.
Yeah,
I suppose, naturally.
But I'm wondering, are we able to consciously do that, right? Because, like, one thing I see that I see a way of, maybe this is silly, but I'll see like what I call cottage chic, where I notice girls are sort of wearing these what I call like cottage clothes, like sweaters and toques and stuff. It's like fall clothes, let's say, right? All right, so that to me, or they're wearing plaid and their boots, right?
Right.
So that to me is like there's something about that they're signaling, like, I'm an outdoorsy, I'm a northerner, right? That kind of thing.
Okay.
And so that to me is they're acting out this sort of archetype. And I wonder if there's not a way to sort of like be like, yeah, okay, because that same woman, she's also going to go and buy something locally sourced probably, or a locally sourced craft or that kind of thing. Like she's sort of in that peripheral.
Right.
And I wonder if there's like a way to sort of capture that partially developed archetype and sort of merge it together with the gardener farmer type.
Okay, I see.
And sort of be like, you can be cool, cabin chic, stylish person, and also like,
See, but then I think that I think a huge point of everything that we've discussed is where we're getting this type of information from, which is the internet, which is social media, which is mirroring and like it's. I also just think we'd be great to do without, like a point on going back to Knowhere Public House is a brick and mortar place to come and get something to eat and something to drink. The fact that we got to post on social media all the freaking time about what we're serving up, as much as that's beautiful. Yes, we have a way to tell people that we've got a fiddlehead flatbread, that we're making some lilac lemonade. Like, this is great, but also, like, just come the heck down here and figure it out for yourself. Like, turn off the phone, like, get off your phone and create whatever, and just be whatever it is you want to be. Cottage chic or not, but like, god damn that we even talk about it, and that we're so influenced by the screen and connect. Like, there is such a double-edged sword there, because of course we connected this way, and that's beautiful because we're here now. But you guys would probably come down and we'd shake hands anyways if social media wasn't a thing. So, but I just think it's just funny that we discuss and have so much of our lives embedded in this screen, this goddamn screen,
There was a time, early on when we're dreaming about what Knowhere was going to be. We probably knew it was going to be what we wanted to call it at that point. But we actually talked about not having internet available to our clients.
Yeah.
Because we wanted people to engage with each other when they're in our space.
We've done pretty well with that.
We've done pretty well. Some people ask.
And that's fine.
We don't have it listed up on the wall what the password is. But, we had to bend, if you will, to a little bit of, what do you call it, social pressure. So they want to have their coffee, they want to sit here, and they want to look on their phone. Okay. Because in the early days we thought, well, they'll have data. They can use their own data, but no, people want free. They want free.
Yeah.
So we loosened that up. If you ask us what our password is, we'll tell you what it is. But it does go hand in hand with what Kaitlin is saying, that it's a blessing and it's a curse. I had one of our friends Marty was in yesterday. He had a couple of drinks. And he was saying, I don't know what you guys are doing right. He said, but you're all over Instagram, for fuck's sake. And I don't, half of it, probably way more than half of it, is not us. It's our customers who are doing whatever. And so it's cool, it's great, it's happening, it's not costing us any money. We've got a connection with the city, with people who are likely to be supportive of who we are and what we're trying to do. But at the same time, it kind of feels sleazy. It's odd. Yeah.
Well, that's one of those things too, where, and maybe it seems like they are intentionally half measures, but to me, I'm willing to sugarcoat the medicine. Like I'm kind of like, my thinking is like, I would think about this lots. It was like, how do we get more people interested in partaking in this type of lifestyle, knowing that it's going to cost more and all that? Because when we're talking about, well, it's better for the environment, it's better food, like, we're preaching to the converted here, right? So we're like, duh, just do it, right? But I always think about these other people who are like, they're like, yeah, well,
but I can't afford
or
whatever.
Sometimes it's I don't care.
Right.
So it's like,
True.
So like, that's why I try to figure, like, how do we kind of make it cool? Like, because to me, I look at like the sort of modern advertising, and I just look at it as being reflective of our psychology, and it works.
Right.
And I see it, like, to what we've been discussing all night, it's been used to hijack our better nature to do things that are unhealthy for us in our environment and our culture. I'm saying, let's use the same mechanism and reverse engineer it.
Right.
Because that's my way of trying to think, like, we'll try to bring people a little closer to this. Because in my mind, like,
I see what you mean. And that's fair. It's fair to.
It might be too little,
use
too
the
soon.
Same, you know,
Or too little, too late. Sorry.
I'm just. I don't
You're
know.
radical. You're radicalized.
Yeah, I think so. Like, just like, can't you just think about something other than yourself? Like, to everybody, you know, I just want to shake them. It's like, everything has a cause and effect. Like, how, and it just take 2 seconds and think what that might be. And even that action is enough to set you on a path of not just considering about how it affects you. We just live in this society about that. It's me, right?
I agree with you, but there's these, and maybe I've become a little pessimistic, but I always, like, I'll think of, there's this quote, I think it's Jesus on the cross, it says, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do."
Right.
And it's like, in the story, whether you like the religion or not, he's supposed to be an innocent guy on the cross, right? Being punished, basically. He's a scapegoat for the community. Right. Something's gone wrong in the community. Right. He's razzed some rabble, and now they're all rising up. So Pontius Pilate says, "I don't know what to do. Get rid of that guy. He seems to be the issue." And so he's up there on the cross, or getting nailed to the cross, right? And he's like, any person would be like, "This sucks. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm the Son of God, and I'm up here on the cross. Like, what the heck?" And he kind of has that moment where he's like, "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do." And I look at, like, people sometimes, and I wonder, like, I want to believe that a lot of people are doing their best. Right. And I do agree, like, we can make bigger changes. Yeah. We could make more positive leaps in those directions. Yeah. But I just wonder sometimes if it's like, if I'm not asking too much, and then maybe I'm just being too soft, where I'm like, you know, people are capable of little changes and little movements. But, like, that's one of those things where I'm like, because I agree with you, I'm right there with you, but there's a part of me that says, like, I don't know if people can make that turn. Sure.
I think I've always had the disposition that, like, I'm never going to try to convince anybody of anything. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to, like, go to debate and go to, like, really try to tell you why I think something is the way it should be, right? Like, I think you should buy local eggs, not conventional. Like, I'm not ever going to spend more than 8 seconds having that conversation with someone. So for me, it's just letting the chips fall as they may, and hoping that the people that can have the ability to have that self-reflection and understanding of how it affects everything else around them and the ecosystem as a whole, like, I'll just cross my fingers for that to be enough, you know? Yeah. So in terms of, like, going back to the, you know, trying to get closer to having more people, I'll let everybody do whatever they want to do, because it's not, you know, I'll just be the example. I'll just be and act as I, you know, as I may, and have conversations as I may, but I kind of just personally just leave it there.
Well, maybe that's really the best we can hope for, and be realistic, where, you know, if you change one person's life, maybe that's all you need to do. Yeah. But anyways, on that note, I guess we'll probably wrap it up, because we've been chatting for quite a while. I could talk to you guys more. I got more aphorisms I'd like to lay on you and see what your brains think about those. But anyways.
I'd love to do that, Jordan.
We should get together sometime and talk again.
We will.
A couple beers.
We will.
Anyways, so.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for coming down.
Where can people, get to Local House, contact you on social media, where can people get a hold of your product?
So anybody can come stop by at 130 Elm Street, Sudbury, downtown Sudbury. Okay. Bill and I are usually here, one of us or the other, but Pete, Sylvia, we've got Lilith, we've got a great team of all kinds of folks who would be happy to chat and serve you something nice for your palate, and support local while you're doing it.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.